Our next speaker is Professor Julia Pritz. She's an academic director, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Center, IESE Business School from Spain. And she's a renowned expert and researcher on global corporate venture development and as well as open innovation. So everyone, let's put our hands together and welcome Professor Pritz. Oh, just to make sure we got everything in place. Perfect. Thank you. The time is all yours.
Perfect. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good morning to everyone. I just want to, first of all, thank the organizers of Cyberport Venture Capital Forum 2020 for inviting me to this timely and relevant event at this moment. What I would like to do is to go through what clearly says here, to talk about corporate venturing and understanding how many companies are taking corporate venturing as an instrument for growth through open innovation. It's very clear that corporate venturing has many dimensions, and we're going to discuss this precisely today. We also want to discuss some of the challenges and the different opportunities that different agents in the ecosystem of corporate venturing are facing. And more importantly, I would like to share with you some of the research that we have done with one of my colleagues, Jose Maria Ciota, in the last 3 years, talking to more than 200 corporations around the world, basically Europe, LATAM, US, and some in Asia. But I think that what is relevant is that we have also been seeing all these in practice through our consulting work and our working with different corporations. So let me just start saying I'm asking a question. And the question is, what do you think these companies have in common? And let me just what do all these companies have in common? And probably you may think there are several things that they have in common. And I agree with you that there are many things that they have in common. But I think that if we look at all of them, that they are from all over the world, we can reconvene that, first of all of them, the CEOs of these companies, are concerned about growth. And this is something that nowadays is very relevant because not many companies can find new ways of continue growing, some sectors better than others, but definitely this is in the mindset of all the CEOs. So growth is one thing, and also for all of them, this absolutely volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous context that is making for them very difficult to get to what is the aim of many of the companies, at least as a safe bet as profitable growth. We call it profitable growth. So basically, one of the things that all of them has in common, they are going again through growth in this context, is basically that all of them, and this is what they have in common, have taken open innovation and more specifically corporate venturing as one of the engine growth that they are using for growing in this profitable way. It's interesting to see, you can see some of the initiatives here, but we can say that definitely industries has shown that effective innovation, at least to the extent that can be measured, is correlated with better and total returns to shareholders, to stakeholders, and thus a high performance. So innovation, although we will see that not in the short term, but in the mid and long term, makes companies absolutely more robust, even when we are facing contexts that are so complicated. Basically, we want to go through all these and also say that another thing that these companies have in common is basically that they are young in this operation. So if you take a look at these statistics that we have been collecting in the last years, 70% of all these large firms have increased investments in innovation units. So clearly there is a bet for innovation. However, 60% of those units were created in the last 5 years. And in fact, we will see that only 42% of them are using some of the mechanisms of corporate venturing that we will mentioning later. What all this tells me is that companies, in fact, are young, if you want to say that, young in this type of operation, in this type of activity. And that calls for more research, it calls for more sharing, it calls for understanding what are the best practices that we can find among these companies and share it with you. This is why we are here, trying to share what we have learned going through all this research with these companies. Let me just say that it's important first to define what corporate venturing is, because there are many different definitions out there. And I would like to say that corporate venturing is an active collaboration between startups and corporations. And this is just a reminder, this is just a subsegment of innovation. So innovation at large is everything that brings value, novelties that bring value to the firm. Inside of innovation, we find internal innovation or open innovation. Inside of open innovation, there is a set of practices that we are going to call corporate venturing. And just a warning, corporate venturing is not only venture capital, is not only acquisitions, because many times that has been seen as the way large corporations were dealing with startups. Definitely, these two that I mentioned, just mentioned, are precisely one of the mechanisms that we use. But there are many others. And what is interesting here is that companies are using a combination of them. They are not just staying on having a stake in a small firm or buying the startup. They have many other ways of collaborating, and this is precisely what corporate venturing is about. It's also important to realize how big is the phenomena. And just some data here, just to give you all, this is some of the mechanisms that I was just mentioning, going from the cheapest and the fastest one, scouting teams, hackathons, or as I mentioned, acquisition, corporate venturing, corporate ventures capital, and so on and so forth. Important to realize that there are two very important ones that have been gaining traction in the market, what is the venture builder and the venture client, and some strategic partnerships that are being very successful. I'll talk about that a little bit later. So as I was saying, some data just to put in context how big is this phenomena. And I would say that since 2013, as you see here, the number of corporate investments in startups, and by the way, as you see, this is just part of what corporate venturing is about, but this is probably the one that is easier to measure, has more than tripled from 980 corporate investments to more than 3,200 investments. So raising from 19 billion to more than 136 billion. And also, if we take a look at the historical, with a historical perspective, we can see that even the problems that we are facing or the challenges that we are facing in 2020, definitely still we have a very strong number of deals being deployed, being in the six first months of 2020, more than 1,500 deals that are happening in around the world. Definitely, this is slowing a little bit down from what happened last year, but in the context that we are, I think that this is outstanding. So I think that then it's very clear that is a relevant phenomena, that is a new phenomena, new quote unquote. I'm not saying new because that has been going on for many, many years, for decades, but new in a sense for the amount of companies that are joining this type of innovation. And that calls, as I said, for more research and for sharing with all of you what's going on. For instance, in the words of Schneider Electric, a manager, he was saying that they recognize that innovation may come from R&D, that is the internal innovation, as well as all this innovation that comes from the outside, looking at what's going on in the ecosystem and trying to accept that, put it in, integrate that in the company. They need both. What that means is co-investing with partners and working with partners in the way we'll see. So let me just go and share with you what are the challenges and opportunities that all these companies, as I mentioned, more than 200 that we have been working with, are doing in terms of corporate venturing. So the first thing is, as I mentioned, corporate venturing is the work between corporations and startups. But something that we have already observed during these last 5 years is that that we have seen a maturing in the way companies work. And we are going to call these agents that are helping corporations and startups to work together enablers. These enablers are institutions that help precisely this, help the ecosystem to work much better. And when I said enablers, I'm not talking about consulting firms helping the large corporation to work with the startups or vice versa, although this is one of the enablers. I'm also talking about universities. I'm talking about research centers, technological centers. I'm talking about the whole ecosystem of financing, venture capital, business angels. I'm also talking about governments that are pulling together help for these corporations and these startups to get together. And also corporations themselves that are working together for making this corporate venturing much more accessible to a number of firms and also understand how they can bring more value to the startups. So let me define what an enabler is, just to make sure that everybody is on board. So we will call an enabler as an institution or an individual within an innovation ecosystem that facilitates a resource or activity in the collaboration between an established corporation and a startup in order for the corporation to attract and adopt innovation within the open innovation paradigm. So I think that this is what we are seeing is first these agents that are playing an important role and are helping to smooth the difficulties of corporations and startups to work together. So let's continue with the challenges and opportunities. And I'm going to start with the challenges for corporations. Basically, corporations are confronting, and I choose three main challenges, although as you can imagine, there are many others. So the first one is corporate venturing strategy that just mimic competitors. We are seeing too many corporations just copying what other competitors in their same industry are doing. If this corporation puts an accelerator, I also put an accelerator. And I'm thinking, for instance, in an insurance company, very well known, big multinational with, I would say, with a modern approach to management, also innovative in itself, that decides to use an accelerator as one of the mechanisms of corporate venturing. Well, it turns out that in the same industry, there is another company that is much more traditional, that is family owned, that has been for many years doing the same thing, that also put an accelerator. And the question is that the right mechanism for this company? Maybe it is for the first one because an accelerator is expensive. But for the second one, I'm not sure that this is the best way to start. So one of the challenges, and we'll see how companies are facing that, but one of the challenges, clear challenges, is this mimicking to other competitors without realizing that your strategy maybe should be different. The second challenge that corporations are confronting is to find qualified deal flow at reasonable cost. And I think I cannot tell you anything other than knowing that you are also suffering of that. Where can I find that deal flow that is relevant for my company at a reasonable cost? And this is on the table of every CIO and CEO. And finally, and this is an endemic problem for large corporations, finding these internal process and teams to work with the startups. They are not ready for that. They need to work on that. They definitely have a challenge when they start realizing that they are too bureaucratic, that many times they are slow, that many times processes are too cumbersome for the startups that they are trying to collaborate with. So let's take how they tackle these challenges, large corporations. First of all, what we have seen is a realization of the need for setting up this right strategy for the firm. So first is to look at the firm, do a good analysis, do a good audit, and say, where are we going with this innovation? We need to align our innovation strategy with the strategy of the firm, understanding first what are the capabilities of the firm and how can we go step by step towards something that is more flexible, something that is better, more ready for doing things differently. One of the things that I want to share with you is this idea that many companies are also putting in place, that is organizing what they call sensing mechanisms. Why? Because precisely if we are thinking about rethinking our strategy, if we are thinking about the future, and as I said, innovation is never for the short term, is always for making the company flexible and more robust for the mid-term and the long term. So these sensing mechanisms, what they help us is to have a kind of a radar outside of the corporation in a systematic way. And I think that's what is important, a systematic way of sensing what's going on out there and trying to incorporate that as information for keep redoing our strategy and keep aligning our innovation strategy. Innovation is about experimentation, and we need to keep experimenting, learning, sensing outside, and come back and do the same thing. So out of this challenge of just mimicking what's going on for other firms, our competitors in the industry, what we should be doing is just the opposite, is just redoing our strategy in a much more, I would say, with a much more external view that may help us to then capture these things that are needed. The second way that companies are tackling this need for qualified deal flow and reasonable cost is organizing what they call squads. At the end of the day, squads is a group of corporations that get together and try to share cost and also learn together, what I think is very important. Sometimes these squads could be corporations from the same industry, but many times are corporations from different industries, what also brings a very interesting hedge for startups that want to work with these corporations. It's better to have 5 clients at the same time, 5 big clients at the same time, working with them and making strategic partnerships and doing maybe some kind of a supplier, special supply as a venture client is, and so on and so forth, than just doing it with one. So organizing these squads also requires some managerial capabilities that has to do precisely with the strategic partnerships and understanding how to work with other corporations in an agile way at the same time as an innovative way of organizing so startups can work with you. The third challenge is going to be this lack of internal processes and teams to work with the startups. And let me tell you, very important in this case, management training is the name of the game. And I am saying it of course, from a university. And I think that I should claim that without this training, it's very difficult to put this entrepreneurial mindset in large corporations. So before any company, any successful company has started one of these open innovation projects, they also think about first training their talent, put their talent in the right way so they can absorb, they can be an agent of change inside of the corporation. So this is a very important message for all the corporations. Think about how you put together a good group of people that is able to work with these innovative startups. And for that, usually training is the name of the game. Also, we find the work with enablers. As I mentioned, all these enablers, what are doing precisely is do this bridge, is precisely help companies and startups to work together. And they are very valuable and maybe the first step entering in this world when the corporation doesn't have the experience. Let me go just to challenges for startups, and I'm going to go a little bit faster here. And I think here startups face one big problem, that is many times the startup believes that has higher potential, and probably it's true, they have very high potential, but it's very important also to send a message that what large corporations are looking is solutions for something that they have a problem on. And what they want to see is not the large potential, but a way, a nice way to solve the problem they have. And this is something that startups need to understand. The second thing is learn how to co-create. And basically, that's a second message, that usually startups work alone. They are happy to be independent. They have autonomy for everything they want. But of course, if you start collaborating with a corporation, here is where you start co-creating. And there are many issues around this co-creation. Where are the rights of the IP? How to develop something that is useful for the future? How to think about many aspects of this co-creation. And then the last thing is that many times startups feel absolutely overwhelmed by this large corporation that has all the resources, that has all the talent, that has the knowledge of the industry, that many times goes beyond what the startup has been looking at until that moment. So what that means is we need to help the startup to be at speed with the corporation. So how these good startups have been turning all these challenges in opportunities. First of all, startups that are very specific, that go and understand that usually solutions are industry specific. And maybe you have a solution, a sensor solution for the medical device industry, but suddenly there is a large corporation from the automotive industry that is interested in your sensor, and being able to shift and be flexible and try to work on that and develop and be specific for that industry is always a winner. The second thing is, as I said, being part of the solution, co-create. Don't expect everything from the corporation, or don't expect to be the only one working alone. At the end of the day, this partnership is precisely to build a new solution that was impossible if you don't do it together. And finally, enablers again can help us making this bridge between the large corporation and the small startup that is afraid of confronting the big, and see the company as a big challenge. So just to finish, let's take a look at the challenges that enablers, these corporations that we said, these agents that facilitate this work between startups and corporations. What we are seeing in our research is that they are maturing as we speak, that they appear as we speak, that they are really forming, in every day, different, very different in nature, and also new. And this is a challenge because then it's difficult to choose. It's difficult to understand which one is the right good for you. But this is one challenge. The second challenge, as you see here, is building a track record. The enabler needs to build a track record in a world of opportunities, meaning usually these companies start working together, a company, or as I said, a university, or as a research center with a large corporation. And there are so many things they can do that sometimes is difficult to focus. That's a challenge that enablers we see are facing. And then the last big challenge that they face is that they need to be a bridge that is really committed to both sides. They are precisely the ones that are going to be aligning these two worlds, the world of the corporation and the world of the startup. And that commitment is not easy because you need to balance very different things. So how are they tackling these opportunities? Basically, first of all, I would say clarify, and this is a message for enablers, clarify your value proposition. So as enabler, definitely we know that they are very different in nature, that they have very different propositions. A university, a technical center, a consulting firm, a corporate builder, each one have very different value propositions, but inside of the same type, they also may have very different value propositions. And here is a challenge of the enabler to clarify from the beginning what they can do for a corporation. Corporations are looking for track record. They are looking for someone that has the channels, that has the capabilities, that have the skills to prove that they can do the work that they are being asked to do. So deal flow access, loyalty to both sides is the last thing, very, very important. It's for enablers is critical to create these win-win situations and align both parties in the best way. And in order to do that, the capacity of this enabler is critical for going there. So this just has been, a summary, a big summary of some of the aspects that we are seeing nowadays in corporate venturing. I think that this is a trend that is not only going to continue, but to increase, given the number of startups that we have out there, the number of new technologies that are being tackled by all this world of startups. But corporations are also now awake. They are working very, very hard to put together the value propositions for those startups. And the only thing we need is to make it happen. And these enablers may be the ones that many times make this bridge between ones and the others. Sometimes could be directly, but many times are also through these facilitators that help the corporate venturing go forward and make the impact that we need in our large corporations. Here you have some of the studies that we have been publishing with my colleague Jose Maria Ciota for further information. And thank you very much. I hope it is useful, and I wish you the best for this conference. Thank you.